Far more pessimistic than I once told me this joke. Two rabbis in a town had a horrible squirrel problem in their congregations, and they came together to discuss what they could do about it. So they came back a week later, and the first one told the second one, "I hired an exterminator and now the problem's gone." And the second one said, No, I did it for much cheaper. All I had to do was give those squirrels a bar mitzvah, and they never came back." Now, this is clearly not the norm for us here at Shir and Me, and I don't share in this sky is falling alarmism. But the fact is that dropping out of Jewish observance and cultural assimilation to one degree or another is a norm in our culture. Even in our postmodern society, where we have shifted the paradigm of America from the melting pot model, where people's differences ideally melted away, to a tossed salad model, where differences are celebrated, holding on to our ancestral culture is still exceedingly difficult. This tension is beautifully depicted in Jhumpa Lahiri's 2003 novel, The Namesake. In this story, an Indian couple who met through an arranged marriage 2 weeks before their nuptials emigrate to America, where the husband works as a PhD student at MIT. They struggle to acculturate to their new home, which is so strange to them, and so far from everyone and everything that they knew. But they wanted so desperately to build a better life for themselves and for their children. They named their first child Gogol, after his father's favorite Russian author, who has incredible emotional and intellectual significance for him. But his son cares very little about his parents' culture and chooses to go by his Americanized name, Nikhil, symbolically rejecting the world he came from and the emotional significances of his father. While his parents struggled to hold on to their Indian heritage, Nikhil was an American who wanted nothing more than to fit in and not stick out. Stories like these are the norm in our society. It is little surprise, then, that when people immigrate to this country speaking a mother tongue, that language dies out within 3 generations. Assimilation is the norm because it is the path of least resistance. It is effortless. Assimilation is also a problem that is not unique to America, nor to our globalized world. It is a problem that we Jews have been dealing with for 3,000 years. The Torah commanded the Israelites many times that when they entered the Promised Land, that they were absolutely forbidden from taking up the practices of the Canaanites, their sacrificial rites, their dietary practices, and most of all, the worshiping of their gods, chas v'chalila. But in a time where prosperity depended on agriculture and was completely dependent on the fertility of the ground and the uncertain rains, the lure of fertility gods and the Baalim made the Israelites want to assimilate to the culture of the Canaanites. Yes, Adonai is a jealous God, and yes, Adonai took us out of Egypt in our ethnic mythology. But if the rains don't come, and our fields don't produce a fruitful harvest, then our very lives could be at risk. Maybe that commandment about not worshiping graven images isn't all that important after all, if we can guarantee our harvest with these Baalim. In this mentality, we see that even in ancient Israel, assimilation was effortless, the path of least resistance. On the face of these irresistible forces stood one man whose actions and prophecies drew the Israelites out of this mentality and saved their national identity, Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet. Elijah was a spiritual man of deep conviction and belief. He is the prophet, after all, who saw God not in the crash of the thunder, not in the winds of the hurricane, but in the still small voice that dwells within our souls. Elijah's very name, Eliyahu, which means "my God is Adonai," conveys his deep spirituality and his attachment to his Israelite identity. It is this deep conviction that Adonai is one that led Eliyahu to risk his very life to convince the Israelites that assimilating and worshiping the Baalim was wrong. In the northern kingdom, King Ahab was married to a foreign wife, Jezebel, who worshipped the Baalim with great lust and brought the Israelites to participate in her people's cult. As a result, the Israelites worshipped the fertility gods and forgot that Adonai was their God. The problem came to a head when Elijah confronted the 400 prophets of Baal who worked for King Ahab. Now, despite the fact that the Israelites were worshiping the fertility gods, mind you, their crops were not fertile, and a horrible drought had parched the land, much, much worse than anything we're experiencing right now in California. Elijah challenged the prophets to a duel to see whose God was the true God. The prophets of Baal danced in a circle for hours, eventually descending into a violent frenzy. But nothing happened. Finally, Elijah offered a sacrifice to God, and it was immediately consumed. And soon after, rain clouds formed, and a downpour ended the drought, and eliminated any doubt that Adonai is the only God. Elijah the prophet stood up against the forces of assimilation, even against the powers of the monarchy, and told the Israelites not to give in to worshiping strange gods, even though it might seem beneficial to their bottom line, not to give in to fitting in and being like the other nations of the world. He told them to worship Adonai, even though it seemed to go against their self-interest, even though it would be the harder route than simply assimilating. Now, assimilation is often the easier route for us Jews. Here's a story to illustrate this. In May of 2002, a reporter stationed in India traveled to Pakistan to investigate a lead that he had regarding a connection between the notorious attempted shoe bomber and Al-Qaeda. While he was en route, he was captured by terrorists and soon after executed. He was only 38 years old, and his wife was pregnant with his son. Daniel Pearl, as we soon learned afterwards, uttered 4 final words before his capture: "I am a Jew." These 4 words bear witness to Daniel Pearl's courage and commitment to his people. 4 words that convey to us that Daniel Pearl's spirit could never be snuffed out. He did not deny who he was, even when his personal safety was at extreme risk. Assimilation might have been the easier route for him, but Eliyahu Hanavi and Daniel Pearl proved to us that holding on to our Jewish identity with every fiber of our being is essential. Why is that the case? Why does it matter if we hold on to our heritage and worship Adonai? This is the exact question that we've asked tonight in our Haftarah portion. We read from the end of the book of Malachi because it is Shabbat Hagadol, the Shabbat right before Passover. The Haftarah mentions a Yom Adonai, an apocalyptic day of Adonai, in which the prophet Elijah will come and bring the Messiah, which, of course, as we all know, is an important part to the concluding portion of our Passover Seder. In describing the coming of Elijah, the prophet says that the people might ask what the point of holding on to our identity as Jews is. If the righteous and the wicked prosper all the same, why be moral at all? The prophet answers that those Jews who hold on to their heritage will be God's treasured possession, and God will be tender towards them as a man is tender towards his son. This line about the day of redemption when Elijah will return tells us that it is our very distinctness as Jews that makes us God's beloved. A midrash that I love asks the question of why that's the case. If we believe that Adonai is the God of all peoples, and indeed the God of the entire universe, how could we possibly have the audacity to believe that our relationship with God is special? The midrash tells us that God loves hearing the song that we Jews sing, because it symbolizes a deeply reciprocated relationship that we have with Adonai. We all know that every day the Jews sing Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, who is like you, Adonai, which is taken directly from the Song of the Sea in our Torah, and which we sing every day in our liturgy. But did you know that God also has a song that God sings about Israel? It comes from the very end of the Torah in Deuteronomy. It says, Ashrecha Yisrael, mi chamocha. You are a happy people, Israel. Who is like you? The Midrash tells us that Israel is God's beloved because their song is the same song that God is singing. We sing of God's incomparability, and God sings about our uniqueness. We are beloved because we do the same thing that God does. At our Seder tables, we read about how God saved our people from slavery and oppression, and then we leave those Seder tables inspired to go do God's work through our Jewish institutions that fight human trafficking, provide for the needy and the hungry, and use our voice to support civil rights and equality for everyone. Our relationship is reciprocal because we are commanded to be holy, to be just like God. Tonight is Shabbat HaGadol, and just 3 days from now, we're going to sit down to our Passover Seders and retell the story of our freedom. We often think that Passover is a time where we reconnect with our family or reflect on issues of social justice. And to be sure, that is absolutely the case. However, I think it's also important for us to take note on this Shabbat HaGadol of the example of Elijah the prophet, the man who stood the tide of assimilation and in the process saved the uniqueness of the Jews as a people. Passover is also about renewing our identity as Jews. While I believe that every single religion has some access to ultimate truth and goodness, we have to believe that being a Jew is something worth fighting for, worth saying no to the forces that try to make us act like everyone else. When I was a kid in Hebrew school, I was very perplexed by the prayer in our morning liturgy, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani Yisrael. Blessed are you, Adonai, who has made me a Jew. It seemed odd to me that a people who have experienced so much hatred and persecution over the years have sing this song that thanks God for making them Jewish. Being Jewish never seemed like something to thank God for. It seemed like such a burden. But as I've learned more, as I've been moved to tears by our music and our liturgy, as I've discovered the beauty of our textual tradition, and as I've fallen more and more in love every day with this people, and as I've learned from the example of Jews who have refused to convert or deny who they were, even at the edge of a sword, I finally get it. It's good to be a Jew. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani Yisrael. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.